My name is David Hyde. I'm going to give you an introduction to the topic. The purpose of this lecture is to give you kind of an introductory knowledge of what it means to have military and or police presence in any of the countries that are listed in the resolution. I am devoting this lecture almost exclusively just to the meaning of military and or police presence and the current U.S. policy towards military and or police presence. And I will be talking about a list of some potential affirmatives that you might hear next year, but what I'm not talking about is really any of the specifics of any of the countries other than just kind of a cursory background about our current military and or police deployments within those countries and some affirmatives related to some of those countries. But you are getting separate lectures on each one of these countries, which means that which means that anything that I would do about them is redundant. I will talk, I will have examples that talk about some of these countries, and you feel free to ask me questions about those examples, but keep in mind that you will get entire lectures devoted to each individual country. So this lecture is structured into 3 different sections. The first and probably the longest section, which has a lot of different components, is military presence. Second section is about police presence, and then the third section is a list of, or a short list of possible affirmatives available on the topic. The first thing I want to talk about is military presence, because this is really the core of the topic. Like, the topic as originally envisioned was really just military presence. Police presence, or the word police, was added as an afterthought in the topic committee meeting, and the vast majority of the literature and the vast majority of all affirmatives will surround military presence. There are very, very few police presence affirmatives, and in fact, in my kind of survey of what possible affirmatives that I thought people might run, I couldn't come up with a single affirmative in the police presence section of the topic, which means that this is really a topic about military presence, and then there may be like 1 or 2 teams that come up with an affirmative about police presence, but in my opinion, the literature surrounding that part of the topic is very, very poor. So when we're talking about the topic, we're really mostly talking about the military, and in fact, the majority of U.S. police presence is about military police, so it is ultimately really about the military with a very, very tiny, insignificant component of the topic devoted to police. The first thing that I looked at when I approached this topic and kind of read through the amount of literature that I tried to digest was really just the meaning of what military presence means. And I'm going to read you a couple of different pieces of evidence that I found that I think provide a pretty adequate explanation of the term and controversies in terms of what it means. These cards, you don't need to ask me for the sites for any of this stuff or anything like that, and in fact, please don't, because I am making this available later today. That I will email out a full topicality file that includes a pretty rigorous investigation of what the term presence means. In my opinion, there are 3 ways to define the word presence, from simplistic to fairly complex. The first and most simple definition of presence just defines presence as U.S. troops. So the Oxford English Dictionary of the U.S. military, which is a dictionary I did not know existed prior to this topic, but actually does exist, defines presence as, quote, a group of people, especially soldiers or police, stationed in a particular place, which seems to be a fairly accurate description of what most people consider military, I guess, and or police presence to be. The advantage of this interpretation of the topic is it's very simple. Defines presence purely as people, purely as personnel who have to be stationed within that particular country, which means we're mostly probably talking about people who live on military bases in any of the 6 countries that are in the list. The disadvantage to this interpretation is that it is factually incorrect. This is a standard dictionary definition of the word presence. From that perspective, it's great, it's very simple, but any expert in military policy would say presence is much, much broader than that. And if you notice, the definition does not say that it is only troops. It defines troops as probably the predominant example of what U.S. presence is, but it is probably not an exclusive definition of the term, any more qualified definition of what presence means is definitely much, much broader than that. The second type of definition for U.S. presence is a definition that defines it in terms of specific activities that the U.S. military takes in any of these particular countries, which is a very, very broad definition of the topic. And I'm going to read this card to you, which is, I believe, the best topicality card that I've seen on the topic, or the best definition of presence. It's a little bit long. You don't need to be writing during this. You just need to listen to it. And you should pay attention for what it defines as presence, but also, just as importantly, what it says is not U.S. presence. So this card comes from somebody who works for the Institute of Defense Analysis, who's actually conducting a study for the U.S. military. So this person is pretty qualified. He says that military presence consists of all the U.S. military assets in overseas areas that are engaged in routine non-combat activities. Forces that are located overseas may or may not be engaging in presence activities. If they are engaged in combat or involved in one-time non-combat actions aimed at calming or stabilizing an emerging crisis situation, then they are not engaging in presence activities. A variety of recurrent overseas military activities are normally placed under the umbrella concept of military presence. These include, but are not limited to, U.S. military efforts overseas to train foreign militaries, to improve interoperability of U.S. and friendly forces, to peacefully and visibly demonstrate U.S. commitment, to gain intelligence, to conduct peacekeeping activities, and to position relevant, capable U.S. military assets such that they are likely to be available sooner rather than later in case of an evolving security operation or contingency should call for them. So this is a good definition in the sense that it says what it is and it says what it isn't. What is not presence? Yeah.
People that are engaging in combat?
People who are engaging in combat, or or one-time crisis response. So for example, the U.S., South Korea and North Korea has just come under a period of increased tension for a variety of different reasons. The U.S., in response to that increased tension, has said that they are going to conduct new exercises with South Korea that, while this evidence describes military exercises as a presence activity, it says that it has to be a routine presence activity. It has to be done something that is essentially practiced annually. It is not a one-time response. So arguably an affirmative that just decided to reduce one military exercise to South Korea that was conducted, or is the planned conducted operation in response to recent events, is arguably not an example of military presence. It also excludes combat missions. This most importantly affects Iraq and Afghanistan. According to this particular definition, stopping a particular combat operation in Afghanistan is probably not a presence act. Is probably not a reduction in military presence, in the sense that the military, if the military actually goes and invades this Kandahar region of Afghanistan, which is a Taliban stronghold, which is supposed to occur this summer, arguably preventing that particular mission is a combat activity because U.S. forces are involved in actual regular firing of weapons against hostile opponents and are trying to